Computer Programming for Kids. Step 18, Makeover of the form and refactoring the code. In Step 17, we took a little detour to talk about exceptions, try-catch blocks, and try-finally blocks. Now we will get back to the multiple-choice code we've been working on revamping or refactoring, as programmers call it. We will update our app, retrofitting it to use any set of multiple-choice questions we give it. In previous steps, we created a couple of CSV files with questions and answers to test with, and learned how to load them into our app. Now we will make the necessary changes to the form to accommodate this new functionality. First, we will do some dreary and drab and somewhat tedious, but necessary, housekeeping work on the form as the first step in the makeover of how the app looks and runs. Unfortunately, not all of programming is fun and games. There's a little bit of grunt work from time to time. The good news, it builds character, or something like that. Anyway, I'm trusting you to be able to accomplish this by clicking the controls in turn and then using Visual Studio's Properties pane to make these beautifications. Get ready. Brace up. These are the tough and tedious tasks. 0. First, or zeroth, make sure you're looking at the form on the Form1.cs Designer tab in Visual Studio. 1. Change the name of the label at the top of the form, probably still named Label 1, to LBL Question, Label Question. 2. Change the text in that label to "The question will appear here at runtime after selecting a file from the combo box above," or something similar. It will get replaced anyway. 3. Change the group box's text property from group box 1 to make a selection. 4. Change the text of the NYNO label, LBL NYNO, to %, the symbol, not the word, and change its name to label percentage, LBL percentage, the word, not the symbol. We will keep the running percentage of correct answers there in that label, updating it after each click of the next button. 5. Change the text of the label morphable label from question n of 10 to question n of n. This is because the CSV files we load may have more or less than 10 questions. This is because you may want to create your own CSV files with questions and answers you have come up with, and I don't want to limit you to a certain number of questions. Either more or less than 10 is fine. 6. Change the name property of label morphable to label question n of n. Remember, n stands for an unknown number, so n of n can mean 1 of 10, or 3 of 10, or 7 of 3,142, or just about anything else. 7. Make the Show Score button invisible, or you could simply get rid of it, delete it, by selecting it and hitting the delete key on your keyboard. 8. On a similar note, do the same with label geezer, LBL geezer. Either make it invisible or delete it. 9. Change the text of the form itself from "guess your age" to whatever you want it to be. "Guess your age" will no longer be appropriate, although the name of the app itself will stay the same. Truth be told, we should have named it something else instead of being so specific about what the app was going to do. Guess ages and nothing else. Personally, I changed the form's text property to "exercise your cranium." Here's how the form now looks at design time, and in the newsletter you'll see a screenshot of that. Now, for parts of the code we have to change, 10, go to the Code tab, form1.cs. 11, try to build the app by simultaneously pressing Ctrl plus Shift plus B on the keyboard, or selecting Build, then Build Solution using the Visual Studio menu. It will fail because we moved the form's cheese, changed the names of some things, and deleted other things. And then the screenshot is shown in the newsletter of the error messages we get. So let's take care of these errors or squash these bugs. We'll do them together one at a time. The first error is the name button show score does not exist in the current context. Double-click that error message and it takes you right to that spot where the code says button show score dot enabled equals true, semicolon. We see that this is located within the swap modes method. Since we won't be swapping modes anymore, comment that entire method out. Do the same with the calculate age range method. It should then look like this. And then there's another screenshot showing the code commented out in Visual Studio. Note, a shortcut to comment out a line of code or multiple lines of code is to put your cursor at the beginning of the line and press Ctrl plus K plus C. To uncomment an already commented section, use Ctrl plus K plus U. Commenting out these methods takes care of some of the error messages, but brings up some more. Specifically, there are now 3 new error messages. These have sprung up because the calls to those commented out methods are now whining, I can't see the swap modes method. Ah! And I can't see the calculate age and display method. Hoo hoo hoo. The first error message says the name swap modes does not exist in the current context. Double-click that error message. Doing so takes us to the event handler named button1_click. But looking at it, we see that really practically the entire logic or code there needs to change. Before diving into that, though, let's rename the generic name button1 by going back to the designer tab and changing it from that to button next, BTN next. Good. Now, comment out everything between the curly braces and the button's event handler. What do we want the code there to be now? It will be much simplified, at least this part of it. Just type load next batch, left paren, right paren, semicolon, into the code area of the button1_click event handler. We will have to refactor that code next. First, though, let's see if the app will build now. Try to build it again. Ctrl plus Shift plus B or etc. This time, the only error message should be the name calculate age and display does not exist in the current context. Click the error message to go there. You'll see that it's in the button show score_click event handler. Since we won't be showing a score at the end anymore, comment out that entire block of code too. Now again, try to compile or build the app. This time it should work. Run the app by pressing the F5 key or selecting Debug, then Start Debugging from the menu bar. Now that it's compiling again, here's what the form looks like at runtime. And then there is a screenshot in the newsletter of how it looks at runtime. So it still doesn't look as we need it to, and maybe not as we expected it to. Therefore, let's get to work on the code in the load next batch. Note, when you are ready to stop the app in Visual Studio, you can press Shift plus F5 to go back to coding mode. The first part of the code in load next batch looks like this, and it shows several lines of code in the newsletter. We'll keep all that the same for now. That is the first 6 lines of code. But as for the next part, and then it shows an if statement, about the progress bar value. We'll have to change that because the step amount, how far to move the colored part of the progress bar after each question, will vary depending on how many questions there are. Currently, the step amount variable is defined this way. Int step amount equals 10, semicolon. Or what it's saying is the step amount integer variable is assigned a value of 10. This is no longer valid. It was when we knew there would be 10 questions, but not anymore. So change it to this. Int step amount equals 0, semicolon. We will change the number assigned to it later in the combo box select multiple choice file selected index changed event handler based on the number of questions. To figure out what the value of step amount should be, we need to determine how many questions there are. We can do that with the following code. And then it shows a block of code from that selected index changed event handler with the new code bolded so you can easily see it. Number of questions is changed, is added, an integer variable named number of questions, initialized to a value of 0, and a step percentage double data type variable, which is a type of real number, that is one with a decimal point, is added, and it starts off with the value of 0.0. Then in the try block, there's 3 new lines of code also that you would see in the newsletter. Before we forget it, we'd better comment out the variable and constant declarations we no longer need at the top of the form1.cs file too, like so. And then it shows that block of code with several of the variables and constants commented out. This wreaks all sorts of havoc, though, because those things are referenced all throughout the code. We must comment out all the places where they occur to silence the 30 sirens that are going off, figuratively speaking. That is to say, there are now 30 error messages complaining about these variables and constants being assigned values when, according to the compiler, they don't even exist, since we commented them out, hiding them from the compiler. But we can take care of this easily enough in one fell swoop. Simply comment out everything in the load next batch method. Starting at this code, it shows the sequence. If sequence is 1 block of code in the if else, and going through this part, and it shows the if sequence is 10 else if block of code. In other words, we comment out the entire if else portion of code in that method. This hard-coded stuff that we just commented out will all need to be made generic now, as we won't know how many questions there will be until runtime, when the user selects a file, nor what the questions and candidate answers will be. It all depends on which file the user chooses from the combo box. We have accomplished enough for this step, though. We will continue with the refactoring of the code in the next step. Until then, earth-shakingly important notice. If you have a basic programming question suitable to an audience of kids, send it to idiolectable@gmail.com, specifying whether you would like your name and location used if it is printed in a future step of this newsletter. If you are a subscriber to the newsletter, you can also leave a question at the bottom of this step in the comments section. If you do not want to give your real name, a nickname is acceptable. The first letter to the editor of mine that was printed appeared in Rolling Stone magazine back in the early 1970s, and I signed it Sylvester for some reason, which I no longer remember. Finally, it's always interesting to see where people are from, so please provide your city or town or village and the state it's in too, or province or whatever the region where you live is called.